Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we decided to discuss the state of employment in the economy. Recent reports suggested that there is an alarming deceleration in employment growth. The decline or the slowdown in employment is so alarming that that the government also has taken note of the trend, and a lot of discussions are going on within the government too. Just to give you an example, the Labour Ministry tracks the employment trends for 8 key employment intensive industries which are also export oriented, like information technology, leather, gems and jewelry, textiles. Now, these are big employment generating industries as also export industries. So, latest data shows that the annual growth in employment in these industries, which used to be of the order of 10 lakh additional jobs created in say 2011, 2010, today is down to probably less than 1.5 lakh a year. Just imagine 10 lakh new jobs a year until 2011, year after year. And now, last 2 years, 2015, 2016, whether you take calendar year or you take the fiscal year, it seems to be less than 1.5 lakh a year. So, there is a nearly 70% drop in the employment growth. Why has this happened? Is the economy really slowing down? Because the narrative that we get is that there is not much of a slowdown. There is a certain a slight slowdown because of global factors, but we are still growing at 7%. That's the narrative. So, to discuss especially employment and growth, we have with us a gentleman who's worked, researched and written on employment for a long time, Dr. Santosh Mehrotra. He is currently economics professor at JNU and he is chairperson of the Center for Informal Sector and Labour Studies. Earlier he was DG for some years, Director General for at the Institute of Manpower Research in Delhi. So, he is an expert on employment and employment trends. He has been tracking for many years. So, welcome to our show, Dr. Santosh Mehrotra. Please tell us what's going on. You've also been studying the Labour Ministry data, which is about organized industries and 8 industries. That's one thing, but of course, in your studies, you also look at the informal sector very closely. So, we'll talk about that also. But let's first discuss the 8 industry trend. What do you think is happening?
Well, this is not surprising at all. It is exactly what one expected, because one was the immediate impact of the demonetization, and the informal sector was very badly impacted. Yeah. But it's not the most recent event of the demonetization. There were deeper trends already
structurally.
Absolutely.
There was a structurally slowing employment trend already.
Absolutely. And that is because, for instance, in the first half of the financial year 16-17, the investment to GDP ratio, which at its peak around sort of 2007-8, had reached 38% of GDP. We were already down to about 30-31% in the financial year 15-16. In the first half of 16-17, the financial year which has just ended, it was down to 27%. 27% in the first half. The demonetization came after that.
Okay.
Because the demonetization came in the third quarter of the financial year of 16-17. So, private investment had been dramatically declining, and unfortunately we can come back to public investment. Public investment has recently picked up only in the last year or so, but public investment had also been declining until the financial year 15-16. Because of this is reason number one. Reason number two, of course, is because there had been a serious growth in NPAs of the public sector banks. Credit growth has been nominal over the financial years 15-16 and 16-17. I mean,
credit growth at least for February, March is at a 60-year low, I am told.
That's right.
It's been lower than, as low as what it was in 1954. 54 was the lowest apparently.
I mean, that is really speaks volumes for how little private investment is taking place. So that's a major problem. And when there is very little credit growth, then obviously what is happening is that it's clear that there is not only low private investment, there is also perhaps one was expecting that, consumption would rise because monsoons had been good this year, and therefore there was an expectation that industry capacity utilization would have increased, but capacity utilization has shown no signs of increase. That's not happened. And that's how the index of industrial production has shown barely any increase over a 2-year period. So this is the overall picture that we are. So if jobs are not growing, why should we be surprised? Having said this, Venu, I should add that public investment is certainly picking up. In the last year, there have been 2 sets of major developments which could possibly generate a future change in jobs or growth in jobs. And let me explain what I am arguing here. You see, in the first 2 years of this government, there were many projects, over 250 of them, which were stalled. So Mr. Gadkari's ministry particularly took cognizance of that, and there was a massive effort undertaken to de-stall projects which are stuck, and efforts were made to resolve issues with the state governments, and so a very large number of projects were de-stalled. So infrastructure investment started increasing. Now, there's 2 other sets of developments that have taken place that have been undertaken essentially by the Ministry of Rural Development. And that's public infrastructure in rural areas. One is on the rural roads program, and the other is the Awas Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is the rural housing program. So the scale of investment that is now assured in both rural roads as well as in rural housing over the next...
It could generate some employment in the construction sector.
Absolutely. But you see that the construction sector was very important in an earlier period, which you were referring to, when jobs were growing. Because you see what happens when construction jobs grow, it enables the labor market in rural areas to tighten, because people leave rural areas to work in construction sector. So wages were rising in the rural areas, which have stopped rising. So that's another reason why consumption is not growing. When consumption is not growing, jobs will not grow. So the good news, I'm looking for good news here.
Anticipating it.
I'm anticipating good news, that the possibility of consumption rising because construction jobs will rise is
But here I want to ask you something here.
Yeah.
Santosh, do you think public investment alone is enough to take it up substantially, or do you think private investment in the construction sector, real estate, etc., which has been hit very badly by demonetization,
You're right.
is that equally important?
Of course, private investment is equally important, but you see, at least in the construction sector, Venu, we can say that because government spends the money and gives the contracts to the private sector comes in.
Okay.
So then the private sector is assured of projects moving.
There's a contracting out of.
There's a contracting out. So, but your larger point is a very good point, that private investment is not growing, which is what I was saying as well. That if private investment, after all, when we had the dream run of growth between 2003-04 and 11-12 of 8.4% per annum, it was driven mainly by private investment, not just by public investment. Yes, public investment was very important, but I do want to compare the...
Can you give us, since you've been studying informal sector so closely, can you just give us some understanding of the formal sector employment, which as a proxy is captured by the 8 industry labour ministry data?
Right.
And how do you determine informal sector employment? What proxy do you use? And what is the correlation between organized and unorganized? Is it possible that when organized is down, unorganized could be going up? Because I got this narrative from somebody in the government that it's possible that in the unorganized sector things are better. So
Not at all.
yeah. So I want an understanding.
No, not at all. There is no such thing that if the organized sector is doing badly, then the unorganized is doing better. No. I mean, what happens is, in fact, is that jobs in both sets of sectors move together.
There should be a correlation.
Absolutely.
One way or in both.
Absolutely. Yeah? This is the historical evidence.
Either both go up or both go down.
You are absolutely right. And in fact, and it happens both sort of in absolute terms when, you know, organized sector jobs are growing, then unorganized
Actually,
sector
why I'm telling you this, because this question was put to the Prime Minister himself last year in a TV interview. So PM said he first considered that yes, employment numbers in the organized sector is down, because you can't deny that, it's official, right? But he said the story in the unorganized sector needs to be watched, it could be different. So that's the context in which I was asking.
Well, this is the tragedy that, you know, you have to wait for numbers in our country for the employment-unemployment round of the National Sample Survey, which is now currently ongoing. But, you know, we haven't had good data for the last 5 years. We only have the 8-sector study. So, you know, but this is point one. However, the other evidence, which is quite considerable, some of which I've already pointed to, the credit growth, the IIP, the capacity utilization, plant load factor of our
60%.
power plants.
60%.
I mean, with all of this means that organized
sector is absolutely down.
Employment is down.
Which I in my introduction I said in 2010-11 annual growth was of the order of 10 lakh jobs a year. Now it is just 1.5 lakh, less than that.
You see, there is no question that unorganized sector jobs would have been slowing and in fact impacted quite adversely by demonetization. Everyone knows that there was a very significant spike in the take-up for Manrega jobs in rural areas soon after November 7th.
Between October and December, yeah.
That's right. I mean, the data just jumps out at you. I want to cite some of the numbers. On a daily basis, some 3.8 million workers wanted Manrega jobs across the country on November 7th, 2016. 1 month later, on December 10, 2016, the number had risen to 4.9 million.
Nearly 5, yeah.
Nearly 5. By January 7, which is 1 month later, it had risen to 8.4 million. That is a 2.5 time increase relative to 2 months earlier.
This is the demand, is it?
This is the demand on a daily basis for Manrega work. Why? Because obviously the people who lost jobs in the process of demonetization went back home.
And where is this data?
This is Manrega official data.
Official data,
this
yeah.
is official data. There's a 60% spike over this period. Phenomenal.
But do you think the budgeted money will be able to accommodate this?
Now
this big increase?
You see, this is the other interesting thing, that the government realized that demand was going up. So more money was certainly released in the third quarter of the 16-17 financial year, precisely in order to, however, a survey done in about 7 states with about 2,000 households who access Manrega or government schemes tells us the following, that even though over that period, banks were turning down wage requests on Manrega or old age pension requests on Manrega, because obviously banks didn't have money. I mean, okay. So that's why you saw in the budget of February 1 of this year, there was a significant increase in the allocation to Manrega from about 40,000 crores last year to about 48,000 crores this year. But this is partly because there are already backlog of wages which had not been paid. And also for materials payments had not been made. I've just come back from Chhattisgarh and learnt this from the Chhattisgarh government directly. So clearly demand for wage work on public employment in rural areas increased. Why? Because people were going back. They had lost their jobs. So, this effect is not going away. And you and I know that there was a study by the All India Manufacturers Association which said very clearly that there had been within the first 34 days alone about a 35% loss of jobs in the sectors that, and they are all micro, small and medium enterprises who are members of this organization. So, and it represents some 3 lakh MSMEs.
So with remonetization, how much do you think the jobs are coming back? The jobs lost are coming back?
Well, they are bound to be coming back. There is no question about that. We will have to wait to see how the Manrega data is showing up. What it is telling us.
It goes back to,
are the workers going back or not? But we will still have to wait a month more before this becomes.
Tell us something, Santosh, about your earlier study which you had published in the Economic and Political Weekly about employment trends, where you had clearly brought out the fact that during the earlier boom period of 2003 to 2010, when we had 8.5% growth.
11, 12, I would say, not just 10, 11, all the way up to 11, 12, the average was 8.4%.
Average was 8.5 roughly. In that period, we did see a big a structural shift in the employment trend, as in you had found that at least 20-25 million people had actually moved out of agriculture.
Quite right.
And they were moving
37 million over that 7-year period from 2004-5 to 11-12. So roughly 5 million people were leaving agriculture every year over that 7-year period.
And so total about 25 million people.
No,
right?
35 million.
35 million.
37 million.
So they moved out of agriculture.
Yes, yes.
So that, did that indicate, according to you, a kind of structural shift in the economy? No, and if it did, what is happening now? I just want you to compare that period and intuitively whether that will continue or whether there will be a reverse process. People going back to agriculture or suboptimal jobs in agriculture.
Okay, so let me just give me 2 minutes to sort of explain what was the dynamic which was driving people out of agriculture in such large numbers. Partly, you will recall between 1996 and 2004-5, wages were stagnant and agriculture output was increasing on average at only 2.5% per annum, and which is the reason why Manrega was so important at that point. So when Manrega happened, it actually raised open market wages, not just government wages. The result of that was that these open market rural wages had a knock-on effect on urban wages as well. But there was something else that happened, because the introduction of Manrega was a one-off event. The other big news over that period as to why jobs grew, especially in construction, was because public investment and private investment in infrastructure increased very dramatically. Very sharply. So, over the 11th 5-year plan period, when I was in the Planning Commission, for instance, we had $100 billion worth of infrastructure investment taking place every year, adding up to nearly $475 billion between 2007 and 2012. Now, so not surprising that wages were rising, therefore consumption rose, therefore poverty declined, and so all of that was happening. So there was a very significant rise in construction jobs between 2004-5 and 11-12, as a result of which the number of construction workers increased from 26 million in 4-5 to 52 million, doubling by 11-12.
So that's what came from the agriculture.
That's what came from agriculture. And wages were rising simultaneously.
And of the total employed pool, how much was agriculture at that time? I mean, roughly, it would be.
You see, well, overall, the share of agriculture declined because of this the increase of numbers of leaving agriculture. The share of agriculture in total employment in the economy declined to 49%. From 60% in the year 1999-2000. So it was a fairly significant
decline.
Very big decline. Most of the decline was 4-5 onwards.
4-5
not before that. Not before that.
By then, after 4-5, the momentum really built up.
That's right. Precisely. Now I want to compare, because you wanted me to compare as to what is the dynamic now. People are still leaving agriculture, but they couldn't be leaving agriculture on the same scale.
But they can't be going to construction because that activity is stagnant, no?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right that since 11-12, infrastructure investment really slowed down very dramatically and construction activities really slowed down. But so you've really helped me bring the story up to date by saying, so I want to remind you that I was saying that a year ago, infrastructure investment really picked up. Okay, so in the current financial year, meaning now 17-18, Finance Minister Jaitley told us that we are investing about 4 lakh crore on infrastructure overall. That's public investment. That's what he has budgeted for in this financial year. So what does 4 lakh crore amount to? It amounts to about, at current exchange rates, $57 billion. Now, it's huge.
But it's not nothing compared to what was
absolutely right.
Done earlier.
Absolutely right.
In fact, there is a new ADB data which shows that compared to that period, total infrastructure investment as a ratio of GDP is actually down 3-4 percentage points of GDP, actually, more than that.
Well, this is what is clearly, I've just told you what the numbers are. If you, I mean, I'm doing it, that's why I'm doing it in dollars, so that, you know, you can compare the $57 billion expected infrastructure investment all taken together, you know, the Surface Transport Ministry plus the rural development and all other, you know, sectors taken together, as opposed to what was happening, excuse me, annually over the period 2007-12. So, yes, it has increased relative to what was happening over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years, but it's still a long way away from the dream run of infrastructure investment between 2007 and 2012. But I haven't notice anything about manufacturing and services sector employment. Let me say a few words about it. It's very important that we should
because manufacturing is also kind of negative growth.
You're absolutely right, which we talked about at the beginning.
Well, and in the context of services, Santosh, just want to remind you of one data point, very interesting data point, which has come from NASSCOM, which is a body for the IT sector, the industry body. They say that in 2010, for every extra $1 billion worth of revenues, export revenues, mostly the export, they employed 31,000 engineers, software engineers. And now for today, for generating $1 billion, same revenue, $1 billion of extra revenue, they employ only 16,000. Half because of automation.
That's right.
Earlier, one person managed 10 servers. Now, one person with automation, help of automation, managing 50 servers, 70 servers, 100 servers. I'm just sort of...
No, you're absolutely spot on. I think Industry 4.0 is going to be a challenge for us. We all know that the capital to output ratio has been systematically increasing and labor to output ratio has been systematically declining. There are real issues here in the manufacturing sector. So, which underlines the point that if our manufacturing sector is to generate jobs, they must generate jobs in the labor intensive sectors, which are the traditional ones, which are
these 8 industries for which we are getting data.
So, I mean, let's just remind ourselves which one they are. Food processing, textiles and garments, leather, furniture and wood products. These are the 4 or 5 which are the big job generators, and most of these jobs, let me remind you, are in the unorganized sector. So, when jobs are not growing, generally it is these labor intensive jobs are also which are impacted. Now, how do you ensure, so you may well ask the question, how do you ensure more job growth in the labor intensive manufacturing sectors? It's absolutely critical that we think seriously about this. But this requires a broader macroeconomic strategy, which takes me back to my point about construction jobs growing, because if agriculture growth is good, therefore agriculture needs investment, and if construction jobs are growing, then rural demand is really booming. And rural consumption, absolutely.
Private investment, construction has to be revived.
Absolutely. So, if you,
I think that is the key.
Agriculture demand as well as in the construction sector, then rural wages will rise. demand will rise for all kinds of products, and that's what going to generate jobs in the unorganized sector in manufacturing. That's precisely the dynamic that was in place over 2004-5 and 11-12. So in other words, it's possible for us to do, when we say that, the international economy is not doing too well, we have to worry about generating more domestic demand for manufacturers and consumer goods, and it's possible to do that at the bottom of the pyramid.
You're right. Construction and infrastructure is a non-tradable. It is not something which is globally traded.
Precisely.
Global recession doesn't affect that. So,
precisely.
So that's the focus that we need to keep. Yeah.
Absolutely. So one reason for the very rapid growth over that 2003, 4, 11, 12 period was international demand was growing. We know that international demand will not be growing, so that might not generate that many jobs.
Oh, it's coming back a little.
A little bit. I agree with you, but at the same time, we still have to focus on domestic demand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that should be the focus. Thank you very much, Professor Santosh Mehrotra, for talking to us on employment, a very critical subject. So that's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.